Hi everyone. Today, I want to talk to you about the medieval church. A few years ago, I was perusing reviews of a Disney movie, Robin Hood. While doing so, I learned that the character Friar Tuck was originally supposed to be a pig instead of a badger. I also learned that Warner Brothers made a theatrical short in the 1950s called Robin Hood Daffy, in which Friar Tuck was played by a pig. That got me thinking, why would the television industry associate friars with pigs? Does this reflect a wider trend? I did a little research, and it turns out that the image of medieval monks as men with porcine figures is a prevalent one in Western society. The question I then had is this image accurate, or is it just another stereotype about the Middle Ages? Much like people having rotten teeth and witches getting burned at the stake. In today's recording, I'll try to find out. By the way, just a heads up, to keep the recording at a reasonable length, I'll be focusing on Western Europe and the 11th to 15th centuries. With that said, let's begin. I first want to discuss the monkish diet. In this area, one of the largest religious orders in Europe, was also the one which attracted the most controversy. I am talking about the Benedictine order. A typical criticism was that of the 12th century abbot Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard reported that, although the monks at the Benedictine abbey of Cluny didn't eat red meat, they compensated by doubling down on fish consumption, and their fish dishes were of unbelievable quantity. I think one could almost go so far as to say that you wouldn't be able to tell apart the dining table of a petty aristocrat and of a Benedictine monk. It was in this climate that two orders splintered off for Benedictines, the Cistercians and the Carthusians. Both of them appeared towards the end of the 11th century. Both of them wanted to reflect more faithfully the dietary prescriptions of Saint Benedict, the Benedictine order's founder. But Monk Daniel Water, who visited a Cistercian abbey in Yorkshire in 1136, offers us a glimpse of what the Cistercian diet may have consisted of, at least in its early days. He describes a monk's diet as a pound of bread and a pint of beans daily. The Carthusians subsisted on a very similar diet. I should also mention that two additional orders arose in the early 1200s, the Dominican and Franciscan orders. They weren't splinter groups, but their diets were far more austere than that of the Benedictines. Oddly, all these new orders don't seem to have prompted any rethinking among the Benedictines. The late 12th century writer Gerald of Wales claims that the Benedictine monks of Christ Church at Canterbury avoided the prohibition of meat on Fridays by making a soup from it. He also tells us that the monks of St. Swithin's ate 13 dishes for dinner. When their bishop threatened to reduce the number of dishes by 3, they actually petitioned the King of England to intervene. In the 14th century, the recipes used by monks from Evesham Abbey included crab meat mixed into scrambled eggs, and dishes containing ox tongue, veal, and wild boar. In 1336, Pope Benedict XII decided that Benedictines could eat meat on 4 days of a week, so long as this was outside fasting season and the food wasn't served in the refectory. In 1421, the King of England allowed monks in the region of Canterbury, most of which were Benedictines, to replace fish with meaty foods on fasting days. At Cluny, fish, chicken, and eggs were a major part of a monk's diet until the end of the Middle Ages and beyond. Lastly, the budget for Westminster Abbey in 1491-1492 included the purchase of 80,000 eggs, which works out to about 5 eggs per monk daily. But perhaps we shouldn't judge the Benedictines too harshly. They weren't the only ones who fell short of their vows. According to Gerald of Wales, it was common for holy men in Germany to eat beaver tails during fasting times. The reasoning was simple. Beavers were considered fish, and fish were allowed on the monastic table. We're also told that in some parts of Ireland, religious men ate barnacle geese. Believe it or not, at that time, it was widely believed that barnacle geese grew on trees. Since they weren't born of flesh, they couldn't be considered flesh, and therefore they could be consumed by monks. That practice only ceased when Pope Innocent III banned it in 1215. In the same line of thinking, a papal notice dating to 1353 allowed Dominican friars to eat meat 4 times a year for up to 8 days in each period. And archaeological evidence suggests that in the 14th and 15th centuries, the monks at the Cistercian Abbey of Valli Crucis had a diet of mutton, salt pork, bacon, cheese, eggs, and river fish. So far, I've talked about what monks ate. But if we want to know whether they were overweight, it's also worth considering how physically active they were. How much manual labor did they perform? For the Benedictines and Cistercians, the answer seems to have been not very much. At Evesham Abbey, at the end of the 11th century, there were 65 servants for a community of 52 monks. At Peterborough Abbey, in 1125, the ratio was 67 servants to 60 monks. At Bury St. Edmunds, during the reign of Edward I, there were 111 servants for 80 monks and 11 chaplains. At the French Abbey of Meaux, in 1393, 57 servants looked after the needs of a family of 26 monks. Around 1403, the Abbey of Aynsham, near Oxford, had 26 domestics for 22 or 23 monks. These are just a few examples. Now, maybe the monks lent their servants a hand, but the thing is, we never hear of them doing so. On the contrary, there are at least 8 references to monks regarding manual labor as beneath them, or abbots keeping more servants than they needed. What's more, the archives of Benedictine monasteries make clear that most of the manual work was solely performed by servants. But dietary practices and lifestyles only tell us so much. How were monks regarded by their contemporaries? Well, to judge by the literature, they didn't have that great a reputation. We know of at least 14 literary works dating to between the 12th and 14th centuries, which lampooned the monastic lifestyle. Take Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, for instance. One of the story's main characters is a monk. Chaucer portrays the monk as a man who is fat and given to feasting. His favorite foods include poultry and swan. Likewise, Chaucer's friend John Gower wrote a poem in which he derides monks for completely disregarding the intentions of their founding fathers. They are gluttonous to a point where they no longer even experience hunger and thirst. But I think my favorite piece of contemporary satire has to be the poem Magister Golias. The text features an abbot who brazenly exploits the monastic system's loopholes. He's not allowed to eat bacon? No problem. He boils it until it becomes lard and can be poured. He has a craving for quadruped meat, which is forbidden. He gorges himself on fat fish, swan, crane, and geese. So that was a brief exploration of popular representations of monks. Next, it's time to discuss the archaeological evidence, and more specifically, human remains. Earlier, I did talk about archaeological evidence from Valli Crucis, but it only concerns animal bones and human-made objects. In the 2000s, a study was conducted on 274 bone sets from 3 late medieval monasteries in London. The skeletal data revealed that protein and saturated fats were the mainstays of the monks' diets. In addition, the bones were compared to 200 bone sets from secular people in the London region. It was found that monks were between 5 to 6 times more likely to develop obesity-related osteoarthritis, 3 times more likely to develop diffuse idiopathic skeletal hyperostosis, and 4 to 5 times more likely to develop obesity-related joint disease. These are all conditions which can be triggered by overeating and a rich diet. I should emphasize that the study only covered a small geographic area, but it's in line with the documentary evidence. So, in conclusion, the motif of a pig-like medieval monk seems to have had a lot of truth to it. I don't think that all monks were overweight gluttons, far from it. And I can see why Christians might get offended if users of the motif conveyed that message. But, in my opinion, if you want to make fun of monkish overweightness in a historically accurate manner, more power to you.
You see, it's hanging from that tree, now you'll have to carry me.